You talk a lot in your book too, and I appreciate it, about just dealing with failure.
And the value, I was driving from Kansas City up to Iowa, and I stopped at William Jewell College, which is in Liberty, Missouri. And that's the place where, when I was in high school, we would always play AAU basketball there. And for those who are familiar with like summer basketball in high school, you play 4 games on Saturday, and then on Sunday you play until like there's a champion. And I was thinking about just that power of iteration in that, because we played so many games, which was probably too many. Like one summer, I remember after my junior year of high school, I think I played like 94 basketball games, which is more than an NBA season. And it's hard on a 17-year-old's body, but it was great for my brain because the 2:00 game happened and I got dunked on by Corleone Young. But then at 4:00, I got to try again, right? And like do this thing again and see like, oh, what can I modify about that? Which again is very similar to you doing like comedy every week. The more often you do it, the more reps you get, the better able you are to not only iterate, but also manage that failure piece that you talked about of like, yeah, I failed, but like there's another try. One thing I see from people is because they put so much weight on the results of this project. So let's think about this mythical 6-week project I gave you where you have to come up with like a PowerPoint after 6 weeks. They put so much emphasis on what happens after 6 weeks that it becomes paralyzing to start again. Whereas if you're able to say, all I have to do is 20 minutes on this today, and I'm going to judge how quickly did I get into it? Was I present? Did I stop when I said I would? Those are things you can evaluate and iterate and think about, even down to like, how focused was I? Well, how did I sleep last night? How did that affect my ability to get into it? Those are ways you can create these little bouts of success or failure that are, you can then modulate them over time, as opposed to these huge cliffs that I think people go through now where, well, that sales talk didn't go well, so now my whole life is ruined. The answer is, well, you need to have 100 of those, of course. And sometimes that's not possible. So figuring out ways to create little bits of success and failure in your life at all times, I think has a lot of value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think too, when you keep doing it with time, you realize that so much of it doesn't matter. Not being in terms of the results. Like I constantly have to tell myself, well, we can always iterate. We can always get better. We changed our set. That is, Rick Rubin reading his book. It's just like your job is to just keep improving your art, improving whatever it is. You're improving your skill and letting go of all of this stuff around any kind of results, because you really can't control it. And when you're doing stuff, like we're on episode 300 of this podcast, and I'll often tell myself, and my therapist and I will have conversations about this. She's like, the story you make up isn't necessary. I'll be like, I'm bad at being consistent. And she's like, well, how many Thursday podcasts have you put out? How many dumpster fires have you done? How many days of sobriety have you put together? There are areas in my life where I'm very consistent, and for some reason I can't. It's like I still want to beat myself up for not being consistent in this other area. And I think that's something that's really interesting that you get at too. And in the process is, well, what am I getting from feeling shame around this? What is it? Or why do I need to be motivated by procrastination? That thinking of, I was always such a like binge user of drugs and alcohol, but also just binge artist, that I would go into the first script I ever wrote, I just wrote it while I was drinking a bottle of Jack in a corner. I was like very just a binge, feverish kind of writing, and having that, showing up, doing the work, the practice of it. It does not come naturally to me. Now, I look at my husband. I was saying this right before we came on. I was like, whenever I read Paul's book, I'm like, God, my husband's so naturally good at this. Like, he can sit down and focus and get everything done off his list, and knows how much time he's going to spend on something, and he schedules everything. And I can't just throw something at him and be like, hey, let's record this now. He's like, no, we need to set a time for it, and I have to be mentally ready for it. And I am just, not come naturally to me. So are there people that you see in your work that just naturally have this ability more than people like me who are like ADD bonkers people?
I think it's worth mentioning that two things. One is because I'm talking about this stuff and thinking about it, and I've started two businesses now that are entirely around like structure and helping people get stuff done, that people then think, oh, Paul, your brain must be hyper structured and like you must think in a really orderly way. But my brain is a mess. And so probably I'm trying to heal my own wound by talking about all of this stuff and working through it. I think it's also worth saying that I had to come to something of a rock bottom in my own life a couple of times around the way that I worked, which at first was around basketball, right? So when I first started playing basketball, I played it because it was an escape from baseball, right? Like I grew up playing baseball. I found that basketball, I just like it made a little more sense to me. I could do it on my own, whereas with baseball, you have to collect a whole bunch of people to do it. And I did it because it felt good, right? Then, as is always the case with anything creative or artistic or probably even sports, I started to think about what other people thought about the way I played basketball. And so for about, call it 7 years, from the end of high school through college and into the first couple of years as a pro, I played basketball motivated by a fear of failure, basically running from just being scared all the time. And in a lot of ways, I was like an addict in that I was like a workaholic when it came to sports. I was probably kind of OCD about it. I would shove all of my pain and anything that I felt bad about into, well, I can go fix this on the court and then people will like me, right? Which is not a great setup, but I didn't know that at the time. I was just getting through it. It wasn't until, and you know this story, Bridget, but I will tell it for those people who haven't. When I was playing for the Chicago Bulls, I had my kidney and spleen ruptured in a game. And in fact, probably put myself into that position. I was trying to take a charge, which means draw an offensive foul on a Pacers player. And probably did that because I thought I have to do everything right. I'm a hyper perfectionist, even about the way I play basketball. Have my kidney and spleen ruptured on the plane ride back to Chicago. The trainer later told me, he's like, I thought you might die. And I also thought I might die because it hurt so much that I was like, I would rather be dead than to hurt this much anymore. From there, met this guy, Scott Wedman, who became kind of my basketball guru. He had been an NBA player himself. He not only changed the way I looked at basketball, but also just about like doing stuff and got me back to presence, into judging success and failure objectively instead of emotionally, less about like, I'm a bad person because I missed that shot, and more like, oh, I was a little off balance, so the shot went right. So therefore, I'm going to reevaluate how I do this. And then I kind of went through that again in my writing career after publishing a first book in the middle of basketball, thinking that like you, I could just binge write my way to success, that I could do it in a way that was often kind of mean too. Like I didn't really know how to like construct things. So I would rely on just like being as snarky or shitty as possible. And that also required a kind of rock bottom where this editor told me like my second book that I had worked on for several years just wasn't really good enough, which was a great gift. I actually posted about that one time. And she thought I was being mean to her, but I was actually, no, you did such a huge favor to me by telling me like I didn't know what I was doing. And so I had to reconnect to that same like thought that I had about basketball, or that same lesson I had gotten from Scott Wedman around, it's not about gutting your way through. It's not about like shaming yourself and filling yourself with all this guilt all the time. It's about creating these systems and being objective about what works and what doesn't. And so I think I can help kind of anyone get to that, in part because I had to go through that journey myself of thinking that I knew the answer, and the answer was drive yourself through fear of failure, through shame, through guilt, all of that. And probably your husband has gone through something similar, but it just now appears that he's really good at it. And that's something I see a lot, where people will say, oh, you must just come by this naturally. And maybe I do, and that my brain was wired to learn that lesson, but it really took a bunch of lessons before I could get there.